Hello and good evening, I'm Melissa Idris.
And I'm Sharad Kuttan.
Welcome to Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Now, there were some interesting insights from the World Bank's Malaysia Economic Monitor report for June, which was released today. Of course, there were the revised economic forecasts for Malaysia, including a larger than previously expected year-on-year contraction for the economy. But what I also found interesting was that the World Bank pointed out that the government needs to disperse more aid to low-income groups and small businesses. So whatever was given in the Prihatin and Penjana packages may have blunted the initial economic impact of the pandemic, but more help is needed in the coming months. Now, the economic slowdown will last much longer than initially anticipated. According to the World Bank, it could take at least another 1 or 2 years for the economy to return to pre-COVID conditions. So this extended timing, Sharad, could put pressure on particularly vulnerable groups.
Yeah, you know, the question of vulnerability during this time, and of course even previously, and if you remember many of the conversations that were had about the purpose of BRIM, and BRIM being the money that was handed out by government, you know, as cash handouts, precisely to address vulnerability. Right. So there was vulnerability before the crisis and this public health crisis, that vulnerability, of course, now deepening with this crisis. The question really is, what kind of solutions does government have, and does government have the money to, in fact, put, you know, whatever they desire into practice? Now,
speaking of vulnerable groups, there was another webinar today that was organized by UNICEF and the International Labour Organization, ILO. The experts from these organizations are now warning that the pandemic could likely see a rise in the number of children forced into labor. So we could see an increase in child labor because families will do whatever it takes, whatever is needed to survive.
Yeah, we do have, I think, laws that encourage families to keep their children in schools. So, but I mean, the reality on the ground is if the family can't afford to support the children, and the children are an asset for these families, how can you then penalize them for, you know, allowing their children to work? So it's a very delicate balance. You need, I guess, government will need to come in and identify the vulnerable groups and address the problem perhaps before it begins, before, you know, families start to have to push their kids or bring their kids out of school.
Lots of webinars and reports released today. Another one that caught my attention was from Fitch Solutions. They also released a report today in which they said control of Putrajaya is expected to change hands often in the next decade, and that this will cause political and policy uncertainty that could weigh down the economy and the reforms in Malaysia. So Fitch Solutions said politicians were expected to become more populist, introduce more protectionist measures, and were more likely to turn to graft to secure support. If I could very quickly quote the report, they said this could lead to bloated governments with more ministerial positions created for the sake of handing them out to coalition MPs and the appointment of backbench MPs to key positions in GLCs, end quote. Now, these political factors would likely make the country quite unattractive to investors.
Yeah, it's a real conundrum, Melissa, and we've seen over the last couple of months, just in the switch over from Pakatan Harapan to the Prihatin government, precisely those dynamics there, you know, are laid out by Fitch. I think what's interesting is how much just a small shift in support at the parliamentary level, because we don't really know much speculation about how much support Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin has.
Well, I have to say, with the kind of investor sentiment, it really boils down to policy uncertainty, right? If there is policy continuity, then the changes in the political arena might not affect investor sentiment so much. And we also have to bear in mind the interests of investors often are not aligned to the interests of citizens. But they're not, you know, say to trade off one or the other, right?
Yeah, they're not necessarily diametrically opposed, but, you know, at the end of the day, You're right. I mean, the question of what citizens want and how they cast their vote and what kinds of political decisions they line up behind, I mean, that's quite apart from the question of what foreign investor sentiment might be. But again, I think, you know, that argument could be deployed potentially by political sides in this contest, saying, well, if you vote for me, you'll have the stability, you'll have the investor confidence. With the investor confidence will come jobs, so on and so forth. I mean, you could potentially make that argument.
Yes, that's right. Okay, let's move on to other news. Today, the Director General of Health, Dr. Nur Hisham Abdullah, ordered the hiking trail in Broga Hill in Semenyih, Selangor to be closed to hikers as of this Saturday. Apparently, there had been too many visitors to the trail, and some hikers apparently did not comply with the safe distancing guidelines. So, no more hiking to Broga Hills from this weekend onwards.
Well, which is unfortunate, Melissa, because it seems in many ways kind of counterintuitive. Something like the great outdoors, the open air that Broga is, will probably be less dangerous, less risky than, you know, going to a shopping mall with the air conditioning and, you know, and though shopping centers do say they encourage social distancing, I think any one of us who've been to a supermarket in recent days will know that people, you know, lapse in their sense of what is the appropriate distance.
Keeping the distance.
Yeah, but you know, so again, you know, is there a way of managing the crowds at Broga so that it remains an option for those who want to hike and, you know, get that fresh air and so on and so forth?
I'm really surprised. I'm wondering just how many people have flocked to this hiking trail. Must have been a lot of people for the MOH to take, you know, to take the drastic action of ordering it to be closed to the public. But, you know, you're absolutely right. It's the outdoors, and I think after, you know, several months of being locked indoors, everyone just wants to get out to nature and breathe some fresh air.
Also, and I think, you know, the Director General did point this out, that, you know, he was saying, you know, restaurants and all that, people are letting you know, the practice of social distancing and all that slip.
They're letting their guard down.
Yeah, they're letting their guard down. It's a reminder, the constant reminder of public health officials like himself that we can't let our guard down. It's too much at stake if we do.
Maybe this is what we have to get used to lockdowns being seen as a dial. You know, sometimes we have to dial up and dial down. We just have to get used to sometimes there's going to be a lockdown in some places, and especially if we don't comply. So absolutely right. Do not let our guard down for that. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, but after this, we're going to pay some attention to the maritime industry and the role of seafarers in keeping global trade afloat. So stay tuned to consider this.
Virus yang seolah-olah masih tiada vaksin.
Elakkan pergi ke epicenter
kalau boleh lah.
Kes-kes ni
Hi, Captain
Hello,
Aziz.
Captain Aziz. How are you?
Hi.
I'm fine, thank you.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Happy Seafarers Day.
Thank you very much.
My father was in the Merchant Navy, you know, because he was in the Malayan Navy, and then he was.
Not necessary pada saya kalau kita nak menolong sesuatu.
Novel coronavirus yang seolah-olah masih tiada vaksin.
Elakkan pergi ke epicenter
kalau boleh lah.
Kes-kes ni dapat dikesan dan dikuarantin di hospital ataupun di rumah.
Terdapat 86 rakyat Malaysia di Wuhan.
Sosioekonomi Bumiputera ini tidak boleh dipisahkan, tidak boleh dikurangkan ataupun ditinggal.
Pasal apa syarikat tu rugi?
Criteria sukses.
Success is not necessary pada saya kalau kita nak menolong sesuatu.
Novel coronavirus yang seolah-olah masih tiada vaksin.
Elakkan pergi ke epicenter
kalau boleh lah.
Kes-kes ni dapat dikesan dan dikuarantin di hospital ataupun di rumah.
Terdapat 86 rakyat Malaysia di Wuhan.
Sosioekonomi Bumiputera ini tidak boleh dipisahkan, tidak boleh dikurangkan ataupun ditinggal.
Pasal apa syarikat tu rugi?
Criteria sukses.
Success is not necessary pada saya kalau kita nak menolong sesuatu.
Merchant vessels carrying food, fuel, other essential goods, especially during these times of crisis, are also essential workers. Captain Abdul Aziz Abdullah is the Secretary General of the Association of Malaysia's Maritime Professionals. He joins us now. Captain Aziz, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. Now, can you help us understand the role that seafarers played in ensuring the safe and consistent transport of essential goods, especially as countries around the world went into lockdown and global trade essentially ground to a halt?
Okay. Actually, the functions of a seafarer, these are the software aspect of the shipping industry. The ship is the hardware. The seafarers are the software. They are the ones that make the ship move. Even the most sophisticated vessels, they need people to move them. Therefore, the seafarers are the critical people who make sure that the ships move safely and carry the cargoes, whatever type of cargoes that they carry, safely from point A to point B. This they have been doing all the while. Now, more so when this COVID pandemic started, their role became much more very critical simply because the necessities required by people still have to move under the lockdown mode. And most of the seafarers, they work day and night and throughout the year, making sure that the people on the land get whatever supplies, whatever food, whatever fuel and any other necessities that they require. So
Captain Aziz, you have written though that in the early days of the MCO there were some problems with crews on board not being able to leave the ship and a new fresh crew coming on. So could you give us a sense of what were the difficulties in the early days of the MCO for seafarers? Okay,
since this is the first time such a situation is existing, it is actually affected every sphere, every sector of the business in the world. Now, for seafarers, it is a little bit more awkward or unique because when they go on board a ship, they are contracted. Contractually, they are supposed to work for a certain duration, maybe 3 months, maybe 4 months, maybe 6 months. So they expect that after 6 months or 3 months, whatever the contractual period that they sign for, they will be taken off the ship and then they can go back to their family. But because of the lockdown in most countries in the world, this changing of crew could not take place, i.e. those people on board cannot get down even though they have completed their contract, and then their replacements cannot come and sign on or take over the job simply because they also cannot leave their homes. So that created a little bit of a bottleneck. And most of the seafarers were very upset, especially if you can just put yourself in a situation where, with the lockdown, the poor missus is looking after the family in the house, and the husband on board the ship is unsure whether she's able to manage it properly. And
so Captain Aziz, so how was the initial lack of SOPs addressed? What measures have been put in place now?
One thing good was that our agencies, the ministries concerned, they were very proactive. Once the appeal was made to them by associations, by the people, stakeholders in the industry, within a short period of time, the powers that we managed to understand the situation and make sure that at least for the Malaysian seafarers, they were able to be signed off the vessel and also they can join the vessel. It took some time, but in my professional opinion, the duration was not that long. But they needed a little bit of push, which we people ashore did that. We pushed the powers that we a little bit.
Right. Captain Aziz, you also mentioned that there were some snags, in particular in Labuan and also in the territories of Sabah and Sarawak. Why did they present a slightly different problem and take a little longer to resolve?
This is because of the peculiarity of the maritime law in our country. We have 3 shipping ordinances covering 3 different parts of Malaysia. Peninsular Malaysia is covered by the Merchant Shipping Ordinance 52. Sabah has got its own shipping ordinance 1960, and similarly with Sarawak. So they have a little bit more, powers that can supersede the ones that is made by the federal government. So it is entirely up to the state government to determine whether they want to, just like in other cases, if you remember, there were certain cases where the federal government and Majlis Keselamatan Negara made a certain ruling, but the state government decided. So perhaps because of that, in this state, they had a little bit of a difficulty to match into what was stated by the federal government.
Well, speaking about the federal government, yesterday, Senior Minister Datuk Seri Ismail Sabri Yaakob, he was reported saying that Foreign nationals working on Malaysian vessels as sailors will now not be barred from entering and exiting the country. Does the fact that ship crews are often international complicate matters in terms of safety, Captain Aziz?
No, it does not complicate. In fact, it facilitates. It facilitates the movement of cargoes and the working of the ship. But what happened was, as I said earlier, for the Malaysian crew, we managed to solve this problem about crew replacement very fast. But for the foreign crews, we have a problem. Even if they get off the ship, you remember, we were preventing foreigners from entering the country. Similarly, we were preventing Malaysians even to go out to foreign countries. Because of that snag, the rule was that foreigners cannot sign off, neither can they join. But on the 15th of June, as mentioned by the Senior Minister yesterday, even the foreign seafarers were allowed now to be off the ship and also to join the ship.
Captain Aziz, you know, marine transport is an international field. Malaysia, maybe, in your opinion, has got it right. How does that gel with all the other countries? I mean, a ship might dock in multiple countries. How have all those SOPs aligned? Have they, in fact, aligned?
The International Maritime Organization and all the international seafarers organizations, the unions, we have been actually lobbying and petitioning all countries to adhere to a certain standard set of procedures. However, again, it's very difficult to move nations when everybody is very scared of this pandemic. So every country decides on their own. But until today, believe you, all the seafarers organizations, all the international agencies related to seafarers, we are petitioning very, very strongly for governments to take into account that seafarers are a unique breed of people. They do their work very, very differently than other people, and special consideration should be given. And it is being taken note of, and a lot of countries now are facilitating their movement. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with us, Captain Aziz. We're going to take a quick break, but in just a couple of minutes, we'll continue our discussion about maritime transport, commemorating the service of seafarers during this time of crisis. Stay tuned to Consider This.
Bila sentuh soal berita, tiada masa untuk tunggu. Kepada anda kami bawakan fakta, susulan dan kupasan yang terkini. Tiada drama dan tiada pengulangan. Usah tunggu lama-lama. AWANI 745 lebih awal dari biasa. Bila sentuh soal berita, tiada masa untuk tunggu. Kepada anda kami bawakan fakta, susulan dan kupasan yang terkini. Tiada drama dan tiada pengulangan. Usah tunggu lama-lama. AWANI 745.
Isra, apa benda Rancak TV ni?
Rancak TV ni adalah sebuah channel digital yang bernaung di bawah Astro AWANI.
Apa yang best sangat dengan Rancak TV ni?
Of course best. Sebab dia ada macam-macam cerita. Dia ada cerita pasal isu-isu semasa, cerita pasal kesenian, cerita pasal hiburan, cerita pasal kecergasan, cerita pasal sukan, cerita pasal travel, cerita pasal sejarah, fakta-fakta menarik. Dan mereka juga ada buat short film dan juga dokumentari. Dan yang paling penting, Rancak TV tak ada cerita pasal politik.
Bila sentuh soal berita, tiada masa untuk tunggu. Kepada anda kami bawakan fakta, susulan dan kupasan yang terkini. Tiada drama dan tiada pengulangan. Usah tunggu lama-lama. AWANI 745 lebih awal dari biasa. Bila sentuh soal berita, tiada masa untuk tunggu.
Thank you for staying with Sharad and I on Consider This. Today is Seafarers Day, so let's continue our conversation about maritime transport, a sector that is as vital as it is as invisible to the public. Now, joining us on the line now, we have maritime analyst Nazery Khalid. Thank you so much for joining us, Nazery. Now, much of the focus on the global nature of the pandemic has really been on airlines and airports and public transports in cities moving vast numbers of people and attention on ships and ports and seafarers, which are also transporting people, in the kind of global response to COVID-19 and also in the discussion of safety in this industry.
All right. First and foremost, thank you to AWANI for having me on the show. And I would like to wish the 1 million or so seafarers around the world happy Seafarers Day. These are the unsung heroes. We are talking about frontliners, people who work very hard to make sure that the pandemic does not spread, and people at the front line delivering food, taking care of security. But at the same time, these unsung heroes help to facilitate 90% of world trade by volume. 90% of international global trade is carried through seaborne means, in other words, by ships. And shipping facilitates a huge number of activities which are pivotal to the world economy, such as not only global trade, but also exploration and production of offshore hydrocarbon and energy, marine tourism, fisheries, port operations, so many others.
Nazery, I want to ask you, if you could just give us a sense of the actual numbers involved. You already said 1 million people, but as you noted in your own writing, ports are now being run by automation. There's huge numbers of robots being used, and many ships don't have large crews. Is this COVID pandemic a real challenge to the way in which maritime transport operates?
It is. Unbeknownst to most, one of the major issues facing the seafaring community and shipping industry is the fact that many seafarers have been denied shore leave. Can you imagine, working a long shift? Some, seafarers are out at sea for weeks on end, and by the time they get to ports and they all are entitled for shore leave, they are denied entry to the ports where they offload their ships, offload their cargo, because of the curb on movement restriction orders and also the so-called attempts by governments and also port state controls to prevent the seafarers from coming on shore for fear of spreading the virus. But at the same time, these people are suffering from tremendous mental stress for not being able to take a break. And also do not forget that there's a lot of seafarers who are not able to go on board ships because of their movement control order as well. So many are out there not earning salary, and it's very unfortunate that their plight has largely been ignored. That's not to say that the frontliners do not deserve the attention that they deserve, but at the same time, we in the maritime community ponders the so-called the fact that seafarers have not been getting the attention that they deserve, which does not do justice for the fact that they play an essential role in facilitating much of world trade.
Definitely seafarers are an essential service. But I'm wondering, as a very international sector, the maritime transport industry, have standards been set to ensure safety? Because I'm wondering how compliance can be assured across the globe, because there are thousands of ports that dot the planet. How do you ensure compliance?
There is, Melissa. There is an international body, a special United Nations agency called International Maritime Organization, which is headquartered in London, which draws up international conventions, including a lot of the seafarers and the welfare of seafarers and their safety training, and also how their working conditions, so to speak. And but unfortunately, the COVID pandemic has sort of like thrown a spanner in the works, and for practical reasons, many are denied shore leave, and they're prevented from leaving their ships for fear of spreading the pandemic. And one would recall that at the beginning of the outbreak of the pandemic, there were some cruise ships which were denied entry into ports. And it seemed that most of our media attention was just focused on the passengers, but not the crew of the ship. So it is again a point to lament that a lot of the seafarers has not given due recognition befitting their importance in facilitating global trade and the economy.
Nazery, what there's a lot of talk that this moment, of crisis is an opportunity for changing the way in which industries operate. Is that likely to happen with maritime transport? That you will see, a push towards automation, reducing numbers of crew? I mean,
just like most industries, the maritime industry has not been spared from the tsunami of Industry 4.0, the so-called digital revolution. We can see the application of many components and elements of Industry 4.0 in the marine industry. For example, big data analytics, Internet of Things, which are being used by ship owners, port operators, cargo owners, and regulatory authorities and people in the logistics supply chain to monitor conditions of ships, cargo, tracking the movement of ships throughout the particular voyage. And also virtual reality, artificial intelligence are being used on the port side to manage container yards. There are also a prototype of autonomous ships actually out there. And I think it's a matter of time before you can see a wider spread of application of Industry 4.0 as the marine industry digitalizes itself. But at the same time, there's no substitution for human skills, for on-the-spot decision-making. In other words, what I foresee is that although there will be a greater application of Industry 4.0 in the industry, but the role of human beings and also people working within the industry will change along with it. I mean, there is still a need for people to make on-the-spot decision and also the kind of decision-making which even artificial intelligence cannot hope to match, because it also involves a lot of gut feeling and also based on experience and so on. So,
Nazery, in the minute that we have left, could you, what do you think the government could do for seafarers and perhaps also working with ship owners to nudge the industry to protect the livelihoods of those individuals? What could they do? What would be the low-hanging fruit?
Well, obviously, from the point of view of the exemption on tax, that's already accorded in the Income Tax Act, and the income of seafarers working on board Malaysian vessels is exempted from tax. But at the same time, of course, certainly, we would like to see a greater recognition of their effort, and also in terms of the basic salary that they get, the remuneration, the allowances, and also in general the kind of package that most people working on shore get. People work in the office, for example. Well, in terms of.
Well, Nazery, that's all the time we have, but at least here on Consider This, we see, recognize and appreciate the service of seafarers, especially during this time. Thank you so much for speaking with us tonight and highlighting this essential service.
Happy Seafarers Day.
Happy Seafarers Day to you.
Yes, bye. Safe voyage.
That's all the time we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris.
And I'm Sharad Kuttan, signing off for the evening.
Thank you so much for watching. Good night and safe voyage.